Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 280 in Abu Dhabi is less than 2 weeks away. The main event, Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title. And this is a highly anticipated fight card. And I'm going to go through the entire UFC 280 pay-per-view main card, give my thoughts briefly on each fight, and then at the end of this video, I am going to grade UFC 280 on a scale from 1 to 10. And also, I'm going to let you guys know whether or not you should buy UFC 280. Is it worth your money, or should you skip this pay-per-view? Before I get into any of that, I put the entire main card down in the description. I want you to go look over the main card and then comment down below and let me know what grade would you give UFC 280 on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest UFC fight card you've ever seen, before you even hear my thoughts on the card. Now, before I start talking about each and every fight on the main card of UFC 280, how am I grading this card? Well, the three most important factors to me for a UFC pay-per-view card is fights of significance. I want fights that are relevant to the division, whether they're number one contender fights, whether they're, just contender fights in general, or they're title fights. I also look for high skill level matchups, and also, is the matchup going to be exciting? Do I think this matchup is going to be a super exciting matchup? So starting off with the main event, we have Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. And I could literally talk about this main event for hours. It has absolutely everything. There is not a main event I've been this excited for as I am for Oliveira versus Makhachev, probably since Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. That's how big this main event is. And this fight, there's so many different angles to it. First off, you have two elite lightweights. You have Charles Oliveira, who's on an 11-fight win streak. Then you have Islam Makhachev, who's on a 10-fight win streak in the same division. You have Charles Oliveira, who I know he's not technically the champion, but the champion has a name, and it's Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira lost his belt. He was stripped of his belt on a technicality after barely missing weight in his last fight against Justin Gaethje. I still consider him the lightweight champion. I think most people still consider him the lightweight champion. And I consider him to be defending his belt against Islam Makhachev. So first off, you have Islam Makhachev, who's one of his best friends and coach, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the former lightweight champion, the last champion before Charles Oliveira, who retired. And now Islam Makhachev has essentially, in most people's minds, replaced Khabib Nurmagomedov. So now you're getting Charles Oliveira versus the Family Dollar Khabib Nurmagomedov in Islam Makhachev. That storyline's super compelling. You have the fact that I believe, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on this, some people would disagree, that Charles Oliveira, with a win here against Islam Makhachev, I know technically he didn't defend his belt against Justin Gaethje. I consider that a title defense. But he has a stoppage win over Justin Gaethje in the first round, a stoppage win over Dustin Poirier in the third round, and a stoppage win to win the lightweight title against Michael Chandler in the second round. And then he has this 11-fight win streak. He's been in the UFC forever. If he goes out there and defeats Islam Makhachev, I believe he passes the legacy and the GOAT status in the lightweight division of Khabib Nurmagomedov. So that makes this fight massive. Then on top of that, you have the lightweight title. Then on top of that, forget about all that. Skill for skill, this is one of the most compelling matchups I've ever seen. People are scared to go to the ground with Charles Oliveira because of his elite level jiu-jitsu and his submission game. Islam Makhachev, what does he want to do? He wants to go out there, drag you to the ground, beat you up, and submit you. So it's going to be very interesting because Charles Oliveira has always had that defense mechanism where if he gets clipped on the feet, he can just fall to his back. I don't know in this fight. Is he going to be willing to do that? Also, Islam Makhachev is not going to be scared to take Charles Oliveira down. I believe that probably will be his game plan. So it's going to be super interesting to see how these two elite level grapplers match up on the ground. Then you add in the factor that Islam Makhachev, while he's been very dominant, he hasn't really fought the elite of the elite. His best win is against Dan Hooker on a couple weeks' notice for Dan Hooker. So I don't believe this is Islam Makhachev's fault because, fights have fallen out. But there's still kind of that what if factor for Islam Makhachev, because he still hasn't fought the elite of the elite at lightweight. And now his first real big test is against Charles Oliveira, the lightweight champion, who's just been destroying guys left and right. And this matchup is just so amazing. I can't wait to see how it plays out. And then you have the factor of how is it going to play out on the feet? Is Islam going to shoot right away? Is Islam going to try to strike with Charles Oliveira? Then you have Charles Oliveira, who tends to get clipped up early in fights and get rocked, and then he'll fall to his back as a defense mechanism. So this fight is just super compelling. It's for the lightweight title. There's a lot on the line. There's a potential super fight with Alexander Volkanovski on the line. There's talk of maybe if Charles Oliveira starches Islam Makhachev, maybe that will lure Khabib Nurmagomedov out of retirement. I doubt that happens, but there's that possibility. And imagine if Charles Oliveira goes out there and KOs Islam Makhachev and then calls out Khabib Nurmagomedov, regardless if he came out of retirement or not. What a moment that would be. So I absolutely love every single thing about this main event. There's nothing not to like. There's probably some things I even missed because I'm just briefly going over it, but this is an amazing lightweight matchup. This fight alone, I mean, I would probably pay $150 for it. That's how compelling this matchup is. And we're going to see a lot of questions answered. Like, how good is Islam Makhachev's his jiu-jitsu? And how good is Charles Oliveira's jiu-jitsu? Because I'm really curious because I consider them both elite level grapplers. I mean, we know they're very, very good. But who's better? Who has the better submission game? Who has better transitions on the ground? And it's just going to be so fun. I don't know how it's going to, who's going to end up on their back first or how it's going to play out. But I'm very curious once it gets to the ground. How does Oliveira's submission and jiu-jitsu match up with Islam Makhachev's submission skills and jiu-jitsu? Moving on to the co-main event, we have Aljamain Sterling defending his bantamweight title against TJ Dillashaw. I mean, I'm super excited for this fight. You have Aljamain Sterling, who a lot of people considered an illegitimate champion after taking the DQ win against Petr Yan. And then he rematched Petr Yan and he won the fight. It was a very controversial win, but it was a very close fight. It could have went either way. It comes down to that first round. How did you score it? It was a very uneventful round. But you had 2 and 3 for Aljamain Sterling, 4 and 5 for Petr Yan. And Aljamain Sterling gets the nod. And Aljamain Sterling kind of earned some respect from a lot of people for winning that fight against Petr Yan because a lot of people thought he was going to go out there and starch Aljamain Sterling after looking at the first fight. And now he's fighting the former bantamweight champion in TJ Dillashaw, who only lost his belt because he was using EPO. He got stripped of the belt and he got suspended for 2 years. He came back last year and had an amazing fight with Corey Sandhagen. It was very close. I thought that TJ Dillashaw lost the fight to Corey Sandhagen, but nonetheless, he won the fight. He's not lost at bantamweight since 2016. And now you have Sterling versus Dillashaw. And stylistically, this is an amazing matchup too because you have Aljamain Sterling who wants to drag you to the ground and look to get your back and look to get a rear naked choke. You have TJ Dillashaw who has amazing defensive wrestling and he's a very good striker as well. But there's still a little bit of unknown about TJ Dillashaw because he hurt himself in the Corey Sandhagen fight. He got cut early in the Corey Sandhagen fight and he didn't quite look like his elite self from a few years ago. And there's still that little bit of a question mark. And can he regain his bantamweight title against Aljamain Sterling? So this is a matchup I'm really looking forward to. I'm curious if Aljamain Sterling, because there's still some people, myself being one of them, that's kind of a little bit of a doubter of Aljamain Sterling. And I'm curious if he wins this fight against TJ Dillashaw, how will he win it? And will people start to respect Aljamain Sterling as a bantamweight champion a little bit more? And then you have a little bit of back and forth of Aljamain Sterling still saying TJ Dillashaw is still cheating. And I'm curious if TJ Dillashaw loses this fight, I don't know where he goes from here. He's getting up there in age. He's already 36 years old. Getting older in these lower weight classes just does not usually end well. 36 for a bantamweight is pretty old. So I'm curious how he looks in this fight. After, he kind of looked a little bit sluggish in the Corey Sandhagen fight, even though he won. He won with his grappling, not his striking like he traditionally does. And I'm super curious to see how he deals with the elite level grappling of Aljamain Sterling. And if Aljamain Sterling does get him down, how does TJ Dillashaw defend against the jiu-jitsu and the submission game of Aljamain Sterling? And also, if TJ Dillashaw can defend the takedowns, how does Aljamain Sterling look on the feet? That's what I'm really curious to see. And this is just a high-level matchup for the bantamweight title. And, it's just the storyline. It's almost champion versus champion. I know TJ Dillashaw lost at flyweight to Henry Cejudo, and then he was stripped, but he never lost his bantamweight title. And you have Aljamain Sterling, who's kind of been the champion. he's kind of been the champion in his absence. I mean, you had Petr Yan for a while there, but Aljamain Sterling has been champion since, early 2021? So UFC 259, I believe it was, since he got that DQ win against Petr Yan. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of game plan each one of these guys come out with. And this is a super important fight for both guys' career, because if TJ Dillashaw defeats Aljamain Sterling, a lot of people are going to say that Aljamain Sterling was never a legitimate champion. There's going to be a lot of people who say that. So I'm really looking forward to this bantamweight fight. It's for the title. It's super important for both guys, and it's super high level. Moving down the card, we have Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley, one of my favorite fights on the card. I mean, how can you not love this fight? You have Petr Yan, the former champion. Some people believe he never lost the belt, versus Sean O'Malley, who still is really relatively untested. You know, he fought Pedro Munoz in his last fight, but it was uneventful, and then it ended in a no contest after Sean O'Malley poked him in the eye and he could not continue. So we have Sean O'Malley, who's looked really good, but he hasn't really fought the best of competition. You know, the only fighter that he's fought that's still currently on the UFC roster is, you know, outside, if you ignore the Pedro Munoz no contest, is Marlon Chito Vera. And we know what happened in that fight. He got his legs brutally chopped, then flash KO'd with brutal ground and pound elbows, and then he was stretchered out of the cage with no serious injury. But after that, he reeled off 3 wins. You know, he defeated Thomas Almeida by KO, he TKO'd Chris Montino, and then he TKO'd Raulian Paiva. So he reeled off 3 decent wins, and then we were finally going to see him test it against Pedro Munoz, and it did not happen. And so now the UFC's throwing him to the Sharks. He's fighting #1 ranked Petr Yan. And Petr Yan, I mean, shout out to both these guys for taking this fight, because this is a very dangerous fight for Sean O'Malley. But Petr Yan, I mean, to fight a guy who's not even in the top 10 of the rankings. There's so many guys crying about rankings nowadays, saying, I'm not fighting that guy because he's not currently ranked, or he's ranked behind me. I'm only looking ahead. Petr Yan is taking a huge risk here. If he loses to Sean O'Malley, who knows where he ends up in the division. And, you know, this is an amazing stylistic matchup, because O'Malley has looked so good, and he's rangy and he's long. And then you have Petr Yan, who makes great adjustments, but he kind of starts a little bit slow, and he usually comes on in the later rounds. But this is only a 3-round fight instead of a 5-round fight. But also, I believe this is a #1 contender fight. And I kind of wish it was 5 rounds, because if Sean O'Malley goes out there and brutally KOs Petr Yan, there is no doubt he will be fighting the winner of Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. And if Petr Yan wins against Sean O'Malley decisively, I can see Petr Yan getting the next title shot against the winner of Aljamain Sterling, TJ Dillashaw, as well, especially with the controversy in the last Aljamain Sterling fight. So this is a high-level fight. We're going to get a lot of questions answered about Sean O'Malley, and it's a #1 contender fight as well. Moving down the card, we have Manon versus Katlyn Chookagian. And this is a fight that I kind of wish was on the prelims, headlining the prelims. And I wish Belal Muhammad versus Sean Brady was on the main card. But this is still a great fight. Katlyn Chookagian's basically beaten everyone in the division. She's on a 4-fight win streak. She's an elite level UFC women's flyweight. And you have Manon Fiorot, who a lot of people think that Manon is the girl to defeat Valentina Shevchenko. Both of these girls are very high level. Both of these girls are very skilled. And I think the winner of this fight, you know, even though Valentina Shevchenko has already defeated Katlyn Chookagian, I think the winner of this fight could be looking at a #1 contender slot and could be fighting for a title in their next fight. I believe Manon will fight for the title in her next fight if she wins this fight. Katlyn Chookagian, I'm like 50-50 on that. But this is a very important fight. This is a very high-level women's fight. And this is a fight where if Manon Fiorot loses, it's kind of like, well, now what do we do? Because we lost the contender. A lot of people think she's the girl to dethrone Valentina Shevchenko. And for Chookagian, she's kind of, you know, I hate to even compare her to like a Robert Whittaker, but she's kind of like a Robert Whittaker in a way. She's not a former champion, but she's just beating everyone the UFC puts in front of her. And eventually it's going to be undeniable that she deserves a title shot. So if she goes out there and wins this fight, you could easily give Katlyn Chookagian a title shot in her next fight as well. I kind of wish this was on the prelims instead, just because I think Belal Muhammad versus Sean Brady is a better fight. But still, I don't hate this fight. It's not a terrible fight. It's still a high-level fight of significance within the women's flyweight division. Moving down the card to the fight that opens up the main card, we have Mateusz Gamrot versus Beneil Dariush. What an amazing fight. I mean, you have Beneil Dariush, who's on this long win streak. You have Mateusz Gamrot, who should be undefeated or depending on how you look at it. I mean, he lost to Guram Kutateladze. I thought he clearly won that fight. Even Guram said he won that fight. But he has the controversial win in his last fight against Arman Tsarukyan. It was a very, very close fight. It could have went either way. It went to Mateusz Gamrot. And this is an amazing lightweight matchup. And I'm so happy to see Mateusz Gamrot test it against the elite of the division. We know how good Beneil Dariush is, even though he gets no respect. And this could arguably be a #1 contender fight in the lightweight division. I know you have Alexander Volkanovski kind of looming out there, looking for a lightweight title shot in the near future. But in this fight, it's hard to deny the winner of Gamrot versus Dariush potentially being the #1 contender. Bare minimum one more fight after this, and I don't even think that's warranted. I think the winner of this fight should fight for the title next, fight the winner of Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev, and both of these fighters are highly skilled. Mateusz Gamrot is an excellent grappler, and his striking is ever improving. You have Beneil Dariush, who's highly underrated. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He has decent hands, he has decent grappling, he has decent submission skills. And this is a fight that I'm really looking forward to. This could have been a main event of a fight night card, but I'm happy with it opening up the pay-per-view for UFC 280. It's an amazing lightweight matchup. It's perfect matchmaking by the UFC. I think it makes perfect sense. And the winner of this fight is going to be in a very good spot in the lightweight division. And it's such a high-level fight. I mean, Mateusz Gamrot versus Arman Tsarukyan was one of my favorite fights of the entire year. The scrambles in that fight were amazing. It was super competitive. And I think the fight against Beneil Dariush is going to be very exciting as well. And I'm really looking forward to this lightweight matchup. I kind of wish this fight was 5 rounds too, to be honest, considering it's basically a #1 contender fight in the lightweight division. So that's an amazing fight. It's a high-level fight, and I think it will be exciting. I love all the matchups on UFC 280. It's just an incredible fight card. And arguably all 3 of the non-title fights on the main card could be #1 contender fights. That's insanity. And then you have the 2 title fights, with the cherry on the top being Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title. Now, what grade do I give UFC 280? And this was a tough one because I'm doing it on a scale from 1 to 10. And my gut feeling is I want to give it a 10 out of 10. But I feel like it's going to be hard to get a 10 out of 10 out of me. I'm going to need like 5 compelling title fights on a pay-per-view card, which is never going to happen to give a 10 out of 10. But this fight card is very, very close. I kind of, it diminishes it a little bit that I think that Manon Fiorot versus Katlyn Chookagian should be on the prelims versus Belal Muhammad versus Sean Brady, but not by much. I mean, I'm not going to pick and cry about that too much. So I am going to give UFC 280 a 9 out of 10, and that is just insanity. A 9 out of 10. That's how incredible this fight card is, and I believe you should definitely buy this pay-per-view. There's no way you should skip this pay-per-view. It comes on a Saturday afternoon because it's based on Abu Dhabi time. The live event will be prime time for the people in Abu Dhabi, but there's no way you can miss this card. It's just super compelling. There's so many questions that are going to be answered. There's so many high-level fights. The prelims are amazing too, but I'm not talking about that. I'm really grading the pay-per-view portion of this card. But a solid 9 out of 10. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.